I terminated in the first term the Obama agreement, the Iran nuclear agreement, which was a disaster. That was a road to a nuclear weapon. They would have used it. They would have used it 100%. So, you know, when you do things like that, you become a target. If I wasn't doing that, I guess I'd be a lot less of a target. But I'm honored to be.
So President Trump, when asked about the possibility of Iran being the motive of the gunman last night, he said in another place he didn't think so. But of course, we are back with the panel as we continue to get into that investigation. So, Karl, obviously that would have been our #1 story, the Iran story. Today, the talks have fallen apart. The president says he's not going to send his folks over there. Do we even know who we're negotiating with at this point?
Well, we know that we're negotiating with the Revolutionary Guard leadership, which are far more fanatical than whom we've been used to dealing with in the past. You know, it's odd to think about the regime being split in half between extremists and even more extremists. And we hope to deal with the less extreme faction, but we're not going to be able to do so. I thought it was very smart of the president not to send the negotiating team. I thought it was a deliberate insult by the Iranians to basically have their chief negotiator leave Pakistan and go to Oman and expecting the American negotiators to show up and cool their heels while they waited. Also, the Iranians don't seem to understand that they are not in a good position. They are, I think they will realize they cannot simply say, well, it needs to start by you opening up the blockade so that we can now begin charging large sums of money for every vessel that passes through the Strait of Hormuz in order to rebuild our security apparatus. That's not a good starting point.
Yeah, Susan, where does the White House go from here? Because it seems we are at an impasse, but we also know that the president has said, listen, the ceasefire, couple days, it's maybe not going to last forever. We don't know what his plan is now to re-up the kinetic attacks.
Yeah, you know, the original 4 to 6 week timeline, that's expired. All the current options look bad. The option to increase attacks, hit civilian infrastructure, as the president has threatened, the possibility of making a deal that does not perhaps put us in a better position than we were before the war began. So I think that the old maxim that it's easier to get into a war than to get out of it has been proven here for sure.
Yeah, and this president has been adamant through all of his campaigns and time as commander-in-chief. He doesn't want us in anything that is protracted, and his supporters very much are telegraphing to him that they agree with that. That's what they'd like to see. Kellyanne, you're our pollster, so let me bring this up. This is our latest Fox News polling on this. Support for the current U.S. military action against Iran. And by the way, our polling shows people think our military is doing a great job. This is about whether or not we should be there. Support 45%, oppose 55%. This is not a winning issue for the president.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. I can't imagine Americans like war, like bombing. But what they don't want is for the best polling questions, and Fox News asked this early on, do you want Iran to have a nuclear device? No. And if that's why people believe that we're there and that this started, and they do also believe that when an Iranian official said just this week, we have a right to a peaceful use of nuclear weapons, that's an oxymoron to the rest of the world. And if Americans believe that, in fact, a nuclear ballistic missile capability in the hands of Iran would in fact or could hurt Americans and other freedom-loving people around the world, of course that's the mission set, and they're more likely to approve that. But the president's not in there for the polls. People really misread this president. I think a lot of the so-called MAGA influencers have been wrong about him in this last year and a half. He's governing, he's not campaigning. And here, he's a guy who's just not going to look the other way. 50 years of diplomacy or pallets of cash or engagement or containment or pushing back, and yet Iran was on the doorstep of nuclear capability. They were on their way to becoming the next North Korea. Unlimited drones and ballistic missiles. I think President Trump has all the levers here, because our own Mark Thiessen at Fox News had a fascinating podcast this week with the U.S. Treasury Department's foreign controls gentleman, and that gentleman talked about how Iran suffers the most with the Strait of Hormuz in this blockade because they rely on it for 95% of their commerce getting through. 51% of the oil proceeds go to fund the REGC, who, as Karl correctly points out, is running the country right now, the fanatical group. That stands for Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And people should know that. So they're suffering the most. If they're suffering about $13 billion a day if the blockade continues. And this gentleman at Treasury said, if this continues, that Iran will be forced to stop its oil extraction, and that will hurt them for generations to come. We don't rely upon the Strait of Hormuz because we are energy independent. President Trump has made us that way over his 2 terms. China does, Europe does, but this hurts Iran most of all.
Well, and one, for decades, presidents of both parties have said we can't let them get a nuclear weapon, and they are a menace to society, not to mention the proxies, Hezbollah, and all of these other things. So do you give President Trump any credit for taking this on?
Not at the moment. He said this would be over in 2 weeks. We're at 2 months. This is 8 weeks. He says, you know, they can call to get these negotiations started. Why are we waiting by the phone? He said they were obliterated. He said they were defeated. He still says they're defeated. But there has not been regime change, as Kellyanne said. In fact, as Karl said, the Army, the Revolutionary Guard, they're harder line in some ways. They're more radical than the people who were there. They still have the nuclear material. The Strait of Hormuz is blocked. It wasn't blocked before. We're sending more warship, more people. Why are we waiting by the phone? I think it's true that the Iranian economy is going to suffer, but our economy is suffering, and there's a threat of global recession when you have oil prices raised. Oil prices have gone up $30 in the last 2 months. So Iran has lived through decades of sanctions, and at this point, you know, it's like two guys going head to head, and they're saying, I can take more pain than you can take, and I'm going to win this fight. This is Ali versus Frazier beating each other up. To what end at this point? And that's why I think, having lost so many of our allies, the threat of global recession, I just don't think this is a good place to be.
Well, I don't get the impression this president is going to be sitting by the phone waiting for them to call. I think he has some other plans with respect to Iran. We'll see in the days to come. I want to quickly get to this other issue of redistricting. Virginia has voted to change its representation in these House districts from 6-5 favoring Democrats to 10-1 favoring Democrats. The Virginia Supreme Court will hear arguments about that tomorrow. Karl, do you think that there's a real legal possibility that they stop this in its tracks?
I've talked to lawyers about it, and there seems to be a good shot at doing this, whether it happens or not in a highly polarized environment we are. But look, let's be honest, this whole thing of redistricting, which started in my home state of Texas, we were never going to get 5 Republican seats out of that redistricting. But let me just tell you, looking at the California maps and the Virginia maps, if they stand, this whole exercise will have spent lots of time, lots of effort, lots of political capital, and the Democrats will come out a point or two, you know, a seat or two ahead of the Republicans in it. This was, in my opinion, foolish to begin with. We've wasted a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of credibility by engaging in this. Both sides. It has further caused the American people to say, you're just all playing political games. You don't care about us.
A political wash, but I think the real effect may be how it's energized Democrats, because they were encouraged that Democratic governors fought back once Texas started.
Baloney. That matters in the greater scheme of things about this much. Democrats are going to be energized by their antagonism towards Donald Trump, and the Republicans are going to be antagonized by what most of these Democratic candidates are coming down, which is on the far left of America.
I'm sorry. The approval rating for the Democratic Party among Democrats is extremely low.
Oh yes, but by the American people, they're less popular than the Republicans and less popular than the president.
But as you're saying, within the party, Democrats want to see more action. They want to see more action.
Maybe, but they're progressive ideas. If they could just campaign on their ideas, they could. Instead, they're going from a 6-5 map in Virginia to 10-1. That's not restoring fairness. That's called the fixes. And the $63 million spent. Abigail Spanberger said she'd work on affordability. She spent $63 million and counting on this nonsense thing that's probably unconstitutional.
Well, she got across the finish line. We will now see what the courts do with it. Thank you, panel, very much.